So this evening we're going to talk about music, and in speaking about music I want to take a few minutes first just to situate us in the general curriculum. Many of you probably have read about the trivium and the quadrivium, and in the trivium and the quadrivium, the trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So how to make a sentence, how to make a unit of argument, and how to build a field of knowledge, all of the language arts. The quadrivium is an interesting collection from our point of view because it's arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. And from our point of view, arithmetic is math, and geometry is math, and astronomy is just one of those sciences that isn't very important, and music is completely extracurricular. But let me give you just a little different perspective, first of all on astronomy briefly, and then on music. Astronomy in the Middle Ages and up until the telescope became very serious. The telescope was invented in 1609, and then gradually the idea of the universe changes. But even in the beginning of the 20th century, it was still thought that the Milky Way was the universe, and the rest of the galaxies were either not seen or were perceived as little clouds inside the Milky Way. So the universe, the way we understand it, is pretty recent. But the fundamental thing about astronomy, which remains always important, and you can only get it by going outside, is that when you look at the stars, there is no parallax. That is to say, there's no the left eye looks this way, the right eye looks that way, and closes in on it. It's right there, it's straight in front of you, and if I point at a star and you want to see it, you need to hold your hand parallel to mine and point. And because of that, you actually are physically experiencing an impression of infinity. Because when you move from side to side, the star is still in the same direction. And as the night goes on and the stars cross the sky, the impression of infinity is something that you don't get anywhere else. So it's a very important experience. In music, what we're talking about is that the intervals of the notes and the intervals in time of the notes all have a mathematical character. We don't think about it now because we think about many kinds of music that have odd kinds of timing. But the contribution of music to the sense of rhythm in a person, the rhythm that you have because you breathe and because you have a heartbeat, those contributions are important and are an important part of music. So when they were saying arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, they were saying math, 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 and now we're really serious about math. When I put together my curriculum, I said that we begin with a foundation in philosophy, theology, and Christian anthropology, the Christian understanding of the human person. Then we have literature, which is really the whole lens of how we participate in the larger culture. You have to be able to read and write in order to enter into the large culture. And then I've talked about math and science and history and civics, and finally art and music. And art and music are really concerned with beauty, but music especially is the field which potentially unites the whole thing. If you sing about theological matters, which you do when you are praying and having Gregorian chant, you're uniting everything all the way across the entire human person, the whole curriculum, but the whole human person. So let's then talk a little bit about the characteristics that are so important in music. When you have music, you have the potential of uniting, first of all, the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The right hemisphere is primarily involved in stuff that's new. The first time you meet somebody, the first new face, the first new flower, the first new anything comes in to the right hemisphere of the brain. And when you catalog everything, you catalog it on the left side. So the left side has more to do with analysis, but it's not like it's only for lawyers. Anybody who even says a single word has acted analytically. If I say this is a table, all the tables that you've seen in the whole wide world don't look exactly like this one. It's not the only table, and so it's a category. All the words, all your vocabulary is in the left hemisphere of the brain, and you had better be using both sides of your brain, not only for speech but for everything, but speech just to focus on what it means. The area for words is on the left hemisphere of the brain, and in the right hemisphere, interestingly enough, just exactly parallel to where it is in the left hemisphere, is an area that gives emotional weight to your words. So if it isn't working, you just speak in a monotone all the time, and I can't even really do it as well as it would be done if I really had the right hemisphere out in that place. But you need the two working together. And the fibers that go from the left to the right are called the corpus callosum, and they're always active in music. Well, for one thing, you hear music with your ears, and you process it in the part of your brain that's right here called the temporal lobes, left and right. And the temporal lobes are the only pair of lobes that don't actually touch. The left and the right temporal lobe don't actually touch each other, but they are the two sides. And so having them activated is a very strong way of pulling the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere into coordination, not only to hear that piece of music, but to be the person that you're supposed to be. Music also integrates us from the top to the bottom, as it were. The frontal lobes of the brain are where your deepest thinking and deciding are. And then a little farther in and a little farther back is the limbic area, which is where all your emotions are. And then down a little farther in and farther back is the reptilian brain, which is where your breathing and your heartbeat are regulated from. Now, your breathing and your heartbeat, you know how they're connected to your emotions. You know you breathe faster and your heart goes faster when you're upset or very happy. And getting those three things lined up is an important part of your own wholeness as a human person. Now, music can do this, but here's what's interesting. If you have a piece of noise that disrupts your being so that you begin to sort of put yourself into resonance with something which is opposed to correct breathing and correct heartbeat, that is actually damaging to you as a person. And if you sing things that cause you to damage your vocal cords, that damage is a profound damage. It means that this voice, which was given you first of all for the expression of spiritual love, that's really what the voice is for, is damaged because you've tried to use it to express something which is opposed to love. Obviously, anybody can think of a song that isn't loving, that's out there. But the interesting thing is that the songs which are so hateful are also many times damaging to the vocal cords and even damaging to the ear to listen to. Some of the noise that's out there is damaging to listen to. And you should think that man is a creature composed of body and soul. And when something damages your body, you need to ask whether you're damaging something more than just some kind of external surface. You need to ask yourself whether you've set yourself up in a situation where you are less responsive even to God himself. There was a fellow in France, 50 or 60 years ago, I'm not even sure what his dates are. His name is Tomasic, I think. He's the one who was responsible for the whole thing about the Mozart effect, and all the women in Georgia for a year, I think it was Georgia, were given CDs of Mozart for their babies to listen to. Every pregnant woman was given one because he had done all this research showing how, how helpful it was for people to hear Mozart. Well, what the research really was his father was an opera singer, and then his parents thought, no, he's not going to be an opera singer. How about an ear, nose, and throat specialist? So he became a medical doctor, worked with ear, nose, and throat, and then he started getting all of his father's friends whose voices were having problems. And as he worked on them, he realized that none of the stuff that was going on was working, and that the real problem with these men's voices was in their ears. He said they had damaged their hearing because their voices were so loud. And now they were trying to push their voices to sing notes which they couldn't hear properly. And so then they were having problems. Well, who would have thought that it was the ear that would be the problem? But the ear begins to develop the 4th day in utero, and it finishes developing in the 4th month in utero. It's a very early development. And in utero, the baby hears his mother's voice. And this doctor did this fascinating research finding that some people who have autism have a problem that they can't recognize their mother's voice. Of course, the voice in the womb sounds different. And for some reason, they're just never able to integrate what they heard afterwards. So he would take them into his office, record their mother's voice, and play it to them as it would have sounded in the womb. And they begin to cry. And then he begins to lead them into experiencing their mother's voice as the same voice from in the womb. And for some of them, that is an important contribution to their healing. Who would have thought? But he says, what we hear is so formative of what it is that we understand. And so we really have to think about how we're going to form our hearing. And the point about Mozart, he says about Mozart, you know, he grew up in a musical house and he had a peaceful childhood. So he had, in some ways, just an ideal set of transitions into becoming a musician. And he was a child prodigy, so he was writing music as a child hears music. I mean, he was, of course, better than all the other little children who tried to write music, all 2 of them. But the point is, it came from the inside of him as a child. And the kinds of things that he writes are more helpful for people needing to develop their hearing than any other musician. So he had somebody come to him who was an actor, but he stuttered and he just couldn't get over it. And he said, well, I think I can help you. And the guy said, okay, is it going to be surgery or what? And he said, no, I want you to come into my office and listen to Mozart for 2 hours. But of course he had special earphones and he was doing different things. But 2 hours a day, and right away, the guy began to heal up, he began to lose his stutter, he became a very famous actor in the end. Kind of a fun story. But the point is that what he needed was to integrate his hearing with his speaking. And he had to develop his hearing. So this doctor developed a lot of things that had to do with helping people to hear sounds correctly and then put them together correctly. So when you come back to curriculum, the things I've said so far are just sort of scientific. They're still important. But now let's talk about beauty itself. Because anytime that we're talking about art, the central issue is beauty. And as you know, when we talk about art in the general culture, it's, you know, what I like is one thing and what you like is another, and what you think is beautiful might not be what I think is beautiful, and so it's, you know, it's just all relative. There is an element of relativity. For one thing, my mother's voice is not the same as your mother's voice, and that for me is a central marker of the nature of beauty. So in that sense, it's true that beauty is going to be perceived differently by different people. Nevertheless, beauty has 3 characteristics: unity, harmony, and proportion. And when you have a music that just has a beat that pulls you out to the periphery of yourself, then it doesn't unify your own consciousness. When you're pulled to the periphery of yourself, does that make sense to you to say that when you're pulled away from your heart and out to the periphery of yourself, then you become less unified as a person. And you step out of that music and you sort of don't know where you are, and you don't know whether some of the people on the couch really matter because they're not really part of it. Or that acting from the center becomes less possible when you have been living at the periphery of yourself, especially with something that pulls you to the periphery and holds you there. So music is meant to do this service to you of helping you to move into your center. And art is supposed to help you. It's supposed to be unified, but the reason why it's important for it to be unified is because it's important for you to be unified within your own self. So the next thing is harmony. In music, of course, we have repetitions in music, but it's repetition usually with a little bit of difference so that you're pulling in other aspects of something, and it tells a story. And that movement of harmony is also speaking to your own soul about your own personal need for harmony. And again, in proportion, there are big sounds and little sounds in music, and the whole thing is speaking to you about the unity of all of these different elements. So when you hear a beautiful piece of music, it changes your own interior sense of beauty. Your heartbeat should normalize. Your breathing should normalize. And your willingness to be where you are in the body should become deeper. Interestingly enough, I knew that this research was out there and I wasn't able to find it, and I was just going crazy. And finally, I Googled brain development Gregorian chant. And that got me where I wanted to go, because Mozart is extremely powerful, and that's music. But Gregorian chant, which also has words, Latin words, which for some of us aren't exactly like words, but you can figure them out eventually, it has the same power that Mozart does of bringing the person into a harmonious situation. When you sing Gregorian chant, you're singing something that works with the human voice, it works with the human heartbeat, it works with the phrasing of human speech. And so instead of pulling you away from your center, it allows you to come into your center. And properly sung, Gregorian chant is sung by people who are standing up and who are erect. And the way that the voice resonates in the body is changed by that. I didn't really realize how important that was. I know that when you get music lessons from somebody who's good, they always tell you to stand up, but try this exercise. Just the way you're sitting, or whatever way you sit at home, hum. And just listen to your voice as you hum. Close your mouth, put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and just listen to how your voice sounds humming. Then stand up, put your weight on your heels, which are made for bearing weight, unlike your toes. Loosen your knees, and make your back perfectly straight with your pelvis tilted. Get your head up, tilted down just slightly, and then hum again. And listen to how that sounds. And then move back and forth. And you'll hear that there's a difference in how your voice sounds. Of course, the monks in the monastery are always standing, otherwise they'd fall asleep, because some of their Gregorian chant is in the middle of the night. But this is a music that was apparently put together to some extent actually at the time of St. Benedict and St. Gregory. And then it gradually spread across Europe, and it's all over the place. But Gregorian chant is a music that speaks from the heart, both as a physical piece of music and spiritually, so that it is able to integrate and pull the whole person towards God. So now we are talking about beauty, we're talking about meaning, and we're talking about the nature of the human person, all being brought together in music. There are two other people that might be interesting to you as you try to work on curriculum. First of all, there's a woman named Justine Ward who worked out a system for teaching Gregorian chant starting with children. And the system, she's probably almost 100 years ago, but the system is still there. It's in place. You can go get certified for teaching according to her system. And she has really thought through what music is and how to teach Gregorian chant to children so that they actually learn it and have joy in it. And when I came across her material, I realized that the sister who taught music at the parochial school that I went to was definitely using her materials. And she she'd talk Gregorian chant, and I can still see her hand, directing everything. And I've never seen it since. Your own life, you just think, well, of course, everybody has it this way. But actually, I never ever met anybody else who ever did. But there is a way to go about this if you choose to. Secondly, somewhat on a different level, there's a woman named Linda Bryce who has given a lot of thought to how the voice works to express the interior person. She was a professional voice trainer for a long time, and then she thought, no, I'm going to try something different. And she began working with just all different people, some professionals and some just people who felt like they would like to learn how to sing better, including some old man whose great achievement was to sing Three Blind Mice. But what you hear is you hear his own voice, not a man with a trained voice, but a man who has a self and who has learned to put it into the music, not trying to give a performance, but also not being self-conscious, just speaking about that funny story about three blind mice, all the way to opera singers who, of course, have their own special needs. But one of the special needs that they have is to stay in touch with the words that they're singing and stay in touch with their own souls and not disappear into the professional requirements of their situation. So it's transformational voice training or something like that. But again, it's a way of helping yourself to think about singing in a different way. Really, when we study music, the first instrument is your own body, your voice, but your whole body is involved. And other instruments are important, but really, if we had good teachers, if they were really available to us, if we had grown up with them, the normal voice of the average person is a soprano until maturity, when the boys' voices go lower and the women may divide into soprano and mezzo-soprano. But this situation where you think, well, singing is something that only about 4 of us do. No, that's like saying reading is something that about 4 of us do. It's for everybody. And sure, some people are better than others, but singing is a normal activity. It's a normal use of the human body. And then the other instruments, of course, come along, and it's helpful to learn any instrument because you are more appreciative of other people's music if you play anything. So, do you have any questions? Anything you've been thinking about music? Anything I've forgotten to say that you wish I had said? Tone deaf is probably the key to it. What you're talking about is somebody who probably doesn't hear tones. What Dr. Tomasik found was that if you, he had people come to him who were French speaking, who had moved to America, and who still couldn't make themselves understood in America. And he would take them into his studio and say, you're not actually hearing the tones that are used in the English language. You've been filtering them out because they weren't your mother's tones, and so they don't seem to you as if they should be part of language. I can train you to hear those tones, and then you will be able to speak. So even for going from French to English. So you would be saying the same thing about somebody who's tone deaf. They're probably tone deaf. They're not hearing it. And what he would do would be to listen to Mozart, but I'm pretty sure that within his setting, the listening is not just turn on some Mozart, it's a deeper engagement. But if I were stuck with somebody who was tone deaf and told, do the best you can with her, I would say, I'm going to play Mozart, and I want you to stand up straight and hum just any note, but just hum while you're listening to Mozart. So you engage, but I'm not going to tell you which note to sing, or the one that he played a minute ago or the one he's playing now, so that you begin to engage with the sound and actually hear it. It's not just, oh, turn on Mozart and wash the dishes. Engage. because that is actually auditory training. Well, so you can cut out certain frequencies, and actually you can cut out an even funnier group of frequencies. Children whose dads are angry with them and frightening to them can go deaf in that range where their dad is speaking to them. And old men whose wives are annoying them can cut out those frequencies and become unable to. In other words, you can have a selective deafness for the tones that you just don't want to put up with anymore. Okay, you guys are all laughing in the back now. But it, it does. It does. So if you know that children are doing it, that what that says to you is, this is not a useful approach to being in touch with this child. So find another way. And it would be nice if elderly people did it too, but as long as people, okay, the number of nerves going to and from the ear, you would think, well, the ear, that's a sensory organ, so the nerves would go from there into the ear. No. There are more nerves going from the brain into the ear than from the ear into the brain. So it's the brain that's saying to the ear, pay attention to this and cut that out. Not just the ear listening. Complete surprise to me. So, and apparently also, I didn't have time to research this or figure it out, but apparently also the ear governs some of the eye muscles. So in other words, it's governing where you put your attention. And in a sense, that would certainly be true. You know, you hear a sound and right away you look over to see what it is. But it's actually more than that. The ear is much more of a governor of brain development in utero and of interacting with the world when you're outside in the wide world. Mm-hmm. For the healing of your hearing, Mozart and Gregorian chant are the only two that he's talking about. What he says about Beethoven is that Beethoven is a great musician for people who do know how to listen. But if you haven't developed the capacity to listen, then he's too hard. And he says something similar about Bach, and apparently he goes through a whole bunch of musicians and just says, I've tried them all, and this is the one that brings healing to the hearing. Or this is the one I can use to bring healing to the hearing. So, you know, the great artists that you've heard of, and ask Catherine if you're trying to figure out who's best, they can be great artists, but if you're not hearing music, Mozart is the place to start. That's what's totally interesting. You know, Oliver Sacks, who's a fascinating writer, has this wonderful story called A Leg to Stand On. And he tells a story of being up in the mountains and tearing his quadriceps. And he was by himself, and he was up high, and he had to get down before nightfall because it was going to get cold. And there was nothing to do but just use his umbrella as a stick and just propel himself down the mountain for hours. And then it turned out there were some hunters, so then they got him to the hospital. But in that period of time, he had to just cut himself off from the pain of his leg because that's just survival. So after he was all, you know, stitched up and healed and everything was fine, he couldn't walk. Because his body said, you don't have a right leg. It's not there. And he said he was in the ward with all these people who had had limbs cut off and had phantom limbs, and he had a limb that was there and phantom it wasn't. He couldn't move until, and I'm sorry, but I don't remember the music. I think it was Beethoven, but there was a particular piece of music which, when it played, he could walk, and when the music stopped, he couldn't again, until he, you know, gradually healed. But somehow that music pulled together all of the parts of his brain to understand, yeah, your leg really is there, and it's safe to think about it. You're not going to die of the pain anymore, and you can walk. So it's a fascinating story. So music is an important part of healing, and that also should say something to us because all of us are in need of healing. In small ways, you know, maybe we're not in the hospital today, but there are things in our hearts, things from our childhood, things from the last person who told us that we were stupid or had done a bad job, that are painful to us, and we need to heal those so that we can be the best that's within us in the next relationship. So there's never a point where you can say, well, there's nothing wrong with me, so it's okay if I listen to garbagey music. No, you are a person just like everybody else. You're a member of the body of Christ, and you have a responsibility to make yourself available to the body of Christ. Just going back to what I started with, your brain is what your mind uses to work with your body. And getting the left and right hemisphere coordinated, getting the frontal lobes, the limbic system, and the reptilian system, which is the heart and breathing, getting them all working together is a way of unifying your own self, so that when you reach up, it's your whole self reaching up towards God. Developing